It's 6:07, and I think we better get into our conversation with our guest tonight. So we have two guests. One is a UIC professor who has been working on this issue of immigration and the impacts of immigration, from I guess, Nick, I could say from an academic as well as a social point of view. But he is with us tonight, and because of his knowledge of the community that's being impacted, he's invited Leonie Bucheri. Did I say that right, Leonie? Let me know.
It's so Bicheri works, but Bicheri's the
Bucheri. Okay. All right. I want to say it
the
right.
Italian side of my family says Bicheri, but I'm half Mexican, so the Mexican side says Bicheri. So I let them fight it out.
It's all a name.
I got it. So Leonie, either the Mexican or the Italian side, is with working family solidarity, and as a result, he knows what's happening from an on the ground point of view, working with farm workers, chicken workers, folks around the Plain States here in the Midwest, where the immigrant population has really been key to getting our food out at a reasonable price. And so I'm waiting to see how much things go up in a couple of months with all of the deportations we're seeing. But I don't know, I'm gonna learn. So I'm gonna start with Nick. Nick, start us off. Let us know what we need to know.
Okay, so what I thought we could do is I wanted to give you some numbers and a bit of context about what's happening more generally, and then we'll shift gears. I've got a few questions I wanted to pose to Leonie, just to get the conversation going, and then we can open it up more broadly. So hopefully that's all right with everybody. As we all know, Donald Trump campaigned during the last election cycle about getting tough on immigration, often by advancing kind of loosely formed arguments about the economic benefits of deportation, and by saying that his tough stance against immigrants would unleash an economic boom in the United States. During the first 6 months of the Trump administration, ICE has recorded nearly 150,000 deportations, an average about 800 a day. And ICE is on pace to reach more than about 300,000 deportations this year. What isn't, I think, widely known is that number is on par with what we've seen over the last decade through the Biden administration, Obama administration, Bush administration, and so on. Now, you wouldn't know that these numbers are on par given the hostility with which the Trump administration has talked about immigrants and about deportations, and you wouldn't know this by the militaristic performativity of these actions. But the fact of the matter is, 6 months into the administration, it's basically on par with what we had seen in previous administrations. Now, politically, that does pose a problem for the White House, because the White House has repeatedly referenced a daily goal, not of 800 a day, but of 3,000 deportations a day and 1 million deportations each year for the 4 years of Trump's second term. And so there's a real disjuncture between what the administration has pronounced and what is actually being achieved. And I think this is the reason why, as the Wall Street Journal reported back in May, Stephen Miller, White House advisor, called ICE officials into a private meeting and lambasted them for the effort that they had been doing, arguing in part during that scolding of officials that they could go raid Home Depot parking lots and pick up day laborers to reach their numbers. Stephen Miller, being from Santa Monica, California, I think well aware of day labor hiring sites in California, and that, of course, is what he referenced. And those actions, militaristic and over the top, I think not just kicked off those protests that we saw in Los Angeles, but also kicked off a bit of a renewed debate in this country, as the administration targeted day laborers and street vendors who are just trying to make a living. So, what are the likely impacts of the Trump administration's efforts around deportation and their stated goal of trying to deport 1 million folks each year. And I think when we look at the possibilities and we think about the economics of this and what it might mean for the economy and for everyone in general, we can see a number of likely effects. First, and obviously, is going to reduce the supply of labor in key sectors. And in my comments here, I want to focus quite a bit on construction, but not just construction. But I picked construction because it is one of the leading, along with agriculture, leading employers of immigrants and of undocumented immigrants in the United States. And of course, the Miller-induced raid of the Home Depot was targeting construction workers who were employed as day laborers. But what isn't being talked about very much outside the construction industry is that industry leaders say that already today, there's a labor shortage of nearly 500,000 workers in construction. 1/3 of all workers in the skilled trades are immigrants. And in states like California, that number is 50%. In Texas and Florida, it's 38%. So big numbers. So this is an industry that is a major employer of immigrants and of undocumented immigrants, but also an industry that's facing severe labor shortages. Related to this, also not talked about, is that when we see climate disasters affecting the Gulf Coast, affecting the city of Los Angeles and elsewhere, it's often immigrant workers in the construction industry who are doing that cleanup work. And so the targeting of undocumented immigrants at this time is directly impacting the construction industry, and it has knock-on effects with the disaster recovery work that's happening. Of course, we've got a lot of attention on agriculture, and the U.S. Agriculture Department estimates that 42% of crop farm workers do not have legal status. Now, Trump has gone back and forth on this. We've seen raids in the fields and in food processing plants, but Trump himself has been really sending mixed messages on whether ag workers would be targeted. We also know that impact's going to affect care work, in childcare, elder care, and so on, because so many care workers are immigrants. And we know another big industry that'll be impacted are the hospitality-related industries. And so all those industries are expected to see decreased supply of workers, and this is going to have numerous effects. And one of the ones that I know Leonie's concerned about, Leonie and I know each other from workers' rights work here in Chicago, is that when we see these kind of impacts and we see the chilling effect of deportations and the impact that they're having on community, we know that this reduces the bargaining power of immigrants. We already know that immigrants disproportionately suffer wage theft and other abuses on the job. And when we have these kind of deportation proclamations and the kind of tough talk coming from the administration, we know that it emboldens unscrupulous employers to rob workers of their wages. And we know that that impact has broader implications, more than just the impact on those workers, their families, and their communities. We know that when we have wage theft occurring in large numbers, that in those industries that employ immigrants, but of course also employ non-immigrants, the impact of wage theft will drag down wages and conditions for all workers in those industries. And finally, on the bargaining power issue, we also know that immigrants are often exposed to some of the most dangerous jobs in this country. And when we have this kind of climate that we're in right now, this has a chilling impact on workers' ability and willingness to speak out against unsafe conditions on the job. So there's a lot wrapped up just in the bargaining power question, but of course, the economic impacts don't stop there. If we listen to the Trump administration's rhetoric, we would believe that US-born and foreign-born workers are somehow locked in a zero-sum competition, and that if we reduce immigrant employment, you'll see an increase in the number of US-born workers and job seekers who are employed, right? But studies have shown that actually it's the opposite that's the case, that US-born and foreign-born workers are not competitors in that sense, but actually complementary to each other and economically linked to each other. And I'll just give you a concrete example. So in construction, if we, through deportation, have fewer drywallers, fewer roofers, fewer floor installers, all occupations that have huge numbers of immigrants working in them, we're also going to have less work for electricians and plumbers and so on. And also, we know that when we see the reductions in consumer spending, right, these reductions are going to ripple through the economy. You know, we often talk about the multiplier effect of a big project and what it's going to mean in terms of jobs in an area. Well, reduced spending is sort of like a negative multiplier effect. It leads to slower growth and less employment because less and less money is circulating through the economy. So what would happen if the Trump administration actually achieved its goal of 1 million deportations a year for the next 4 years? Just in the last month, the Economic Policy Institute has done some economic modeling to look at this question. And their conclusions are that if those targets were met, we would see a decrease of 5.9 million jobs economy-wide. About, you know, most of those, about 60%, would be immigrants losing those jobs. But another 2.6 million of those workers are US-born workers losing those jobs. The two industries that they flag as suffering the biggest job losses as a whole are construction. They're estimating a nearly 19% decrease in total construction employment, almost 2.3 million workers across the economy, and childcare. They're projecting a more than 15% decrease in total employment, affecting nearly 550,000 workers across the economy. The Economic Policy Institute has carried this analysis out at various state levels. So in Illinois, I'll just give you Illinois, they're projecting a reduction of 219,000 jobs in the state of Illinois alone, 44% of those jobs being held by US-born workers. So there's really a lie being told here, a lie around an economic boom, a lie around immigrant, non-immigrant competition in the labor market, a lie around what the real economic impacts are of these kind of actions. Jackie mentioned a little bit about prices, and we know that the impact is going to be inflationary. Let me return to construction again. In the case of construction, a reduction in the workforce is going to lead to higher prices on projects, right? And the knock-on effect of this will be that we're going to have higher home prices, which is going to lead to a slowdown in the construction industry as a whole. But, you know, critics say, well, won't wages rise in response to the lowering of the supply of labor, just as Trump was saying? You know, if we remove these workers, won't wages just rise? Yeah, maybe. But if you just look at the construction industry, we already have a shortage of at least 500,000 workers, right? And wages have been stagnant. So this simple cause and effect relationship that's being posited by the administration, or at least one of their justifications for the actions that are being taken, simply does not hold, because we can look at the construction industry, major employer of immigrants, suffering a massive labor shortage, and wages remain stagnant. So simply removing those workers from the economy is not going to create some sort of a wage bump for workers. And in many cases, some employers may simply try to cope with the situation and operate at lower levels of employment, which is why, one of the reasons, the Economic Policy Institute projects lower overall employment because of these actions. And then just wrapping up on this before I come over to Leone, what about agriculture? It's been posited that some farms may explore automation to compensate for labor shortages, but we know that this is going to be expensive and not feasible for all crops. So the most likely impacts are increased reliance on imports, which are going to be more expensive, more damaging for the environment, and so on. And of course, without sufficient workers, farms are going to be unable to harvest the crops, leading to food waste and decreased production. So I think the upshot of this little introductory presentation is that Much of what we're hearing from the administration, I guess it comes as no surprise to those listening now. Much of that is confused and flat out incorrect. Um, but it's used to justify a certain politics, an anti-immigrant politics, one rooted in anti-immigrant animus, and one that is having devastating impacts on communities here in Chicago and elsewhere. And so that's where I think we should make a transition. I'd like to just, uh, as I said, I have a few questions for Leone that I thought maybe could get his voice into the room and also begin to open up a bigger conversation for all of us. So Leone, before we get into the details of deportation, and right after you unmute yourself, could you please introduce us to Working Family Solidarity and tell us a little about this organization that you founded, an organization that you founded after many, many years in immigrant workers' rights work. Don't forget to unmute.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, so my name is Leone Jose Bicchieri, proud son of an Italian immigrant father and Mexican immigrant mother. May they rest in peace. And so, yeah, Jack, you had mentioned earlier, going back a number of years, I've been doing this my entire adult life, but I organized farm workers on the West Coast for some years. And I also spent some years, my first years in Chicago. I came in 2000. I spent about 8 years traveling around the country, working with Interfaith Worker Justice and some other religious organizations, actually, that paid me to coordinate sort of multi-organization coalitions in Arkansas, North Carolina, Georgia, Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, Oklahoma. So a lot of places, and mainly to try to reform the meat packing and poultry processing industry, where of course a lot of Latinx workers are, a certain amount of African American workers in the South, and so on. So I did that for a long time. As Nick mentioned, for almost 8 years, I was executive director of the Chicago Workers Collaborative here in Chicago. And our main focus was to push to reform the temp labor sector. So, again, mainly Latinx workers, a certain amount of African American workers. And almost 8 years ago, now about 7.5 years ago, I founded Working Family Solidarity, Solidaridad de Familias Trabajadoras. Our office is based in Pilsen. We cover Pilsen, Little Village, North Lawndale, a little bit of the near west side, mainly at the Abla Homes housing complex. Back of the yards, Inglewood, West Inglewood, and Gage Park. So a few communities in sort of west, southwest, and south side. And our mission is to unite low-income workers of different racial and ethnic backgrounds, especially African American and Latinx, to fight together for equitable development. We focus primarily on worker rights, increased job access, and pushing for better jobs to be produced that everyone can try to work at. We've added a component. We don't try to do this like say a full-fledged housing organization, but we can't ignore gentrification for a lot of African Americans and Latinx people. We're just being pushed out of Chicago. I mean, African Americans at this rate are going to be a tiny minority in Chicago in another decade, right? And we happen to believe it's intentional. That's our opinion. That low income people of color, the United States was founded on the disempowerment of people of color, right? And that's what's always been the driving motor, hence immigration. When we talk about immigration, we're talking about immigration of people of color, right? In general, we care about and are concerned about Ukrainians and Poles, my father from Italy, but the anti-immigrant movement is a racist movement, right? It's a code for poor people of color, especially those that we could get out of this country. And so I'm telling you that because, and you can agree or disagree, that's great, but you know about our organization. That's our view. We think, and we think that lends itself to the racial unity because we believe that as we are almost half of the population in the United States, people of color, right? We're right on that edge. That's driven a lot of the pro-Trump and really rise of white supremacy movements in a lot of the areas I work where I was telling you earlier in these rural areas. I spent a fair amount of time, I don't know about in the company of, somewhat near, militia groups, posse comitatus, Klan. Some of the times when I worked in Georgia, I could not stay. I myself, lighter skinned Latino, I could not stay in some of these small towns. The organizers that would literally say, it's been a great day, drive 20 miles back to the interchange and stay at that Super 8 over there. You cannot come back here. You got to stay here. So that gave really rise to it. So at Working Family Solidarity, we're really promoting in the communities I've talked to you about racial unity dialogues, and then just in all of our work, one-on-one. Today, I spent a certain amount of time on 16th Street near Pulaski, and coming back into Kedzie in North Lawndale with a Filipino woman, some Mexican people, some African American people, trying to work on sustainable agriculture, but as a way of trying to bring back jobs to the community for both communities. So just, before I answer or give what I think about some other things, just so you have some idea, I guess the last thing I'll tell you is we've been on the steering committee of the Chicago Housing Justice Coalition. We've pushed an ordinance. The sponsor is Alderman Yancey, called Just Cause for Eviction, which probably, if passed, would help 60% African American, 25% Latinx people, and others, to slow the rate of random evictions that happen across Chicago. Not easy, because many of the alders that we've spoken with over the years, they also own apartment buildings. And so they're kind of trying to figure out where their class interests are, sadly, in this struggle. And the other
Joe,
main, let me just say
Joe,
this last thing. Let me just say this last thing.
dinner.
And then something called local hire, targeted hire. So that's where we're trying to push for these companies, documented, undocumented, like Cinespace, for example, the big movie place, to give more jobs to youth in North Lawndale and other areas. And sometimes they get, you don't have to pay taxes for a year or two. You get these nice packages to build your company here, but we want them to give more back to the community. So anyway, that's what we're trying to do. And just so you know where I'm coming from when I answer these questions.
So, Leonie, there's been a lot of attention on Los Angeles, but every week there seems to be a report that Chicago is next. So we know that in Chicago, we've got communities on the edge. Could you talk a little bit about how this current anti-immigrant climate is playing out on the streets of Pilsen and the other communities where you're working?
Yeah, we've seen, definitely since January, we've seen a decrease in, so I would say 60% of our base that are active in the organization are Latinx people. We never ask folks if they're documented or not, but you're smart enough to figure it out. And so we have definitely had less people come to meetings. We did a series of Know Your Rights immigration workshops in the first part of the year, January, February, March, especially. And we had more concern than normal. We had to work harder to get people to come. A number of people wanted to know if there was a virtual option, so they didn't have to come to the office. And when we said, hey, we're not letting ICE in our office, their response, which I certainly understand, was sort of like, you may not stop them, right? Like they might break the door down. And people just being, going to take photos at events we have, right? Hey, let's just take photos of members meeting. A lot of people are like, don't take my photo, take the photo from behind me. I'm like, well, okay. So we're definitely seeing it. I would like to say this, because we're seeing that fear. But on the other hand, I wanted to say this, Nick. I remember in 2008, we had the Immigrant Defense Committee of a number of organizations. We were going around making sure people had what's the difference between a no match letter and an I-9 audit, and so on and so forth. And in the early part of this year, when we started saying, hey, we're going to do these Know Your Rights workshops, what was kind of neat is that I found more people than a few years ago seem to already have gone to one, or their church had one, their school had one. The school where our kids go, Orozco Community Academy here, this bilingual academy here in Pilsen, they had stuff going on for parents. So I thought that was really great. I felt like, even though there's definitely fear, there was also a lot more people prepared as opposed to some years ago.
Interesting. One of the things that we know that in times like this, one of the other impacts, that a non-economic impact, but an impact on families, is that folks are they stay away from medical care. They stay away from some of the child services. They stay away from anything that might look like an interaction with the government. I imagine you're seeing similar kind of circumstances in Pilsen in this environment, even with people being maybe more educated and more prepared to know their rights.
Yeah, I'll give you a concrete example. I will not say her full name. So this is so today is Monday. Thursday, Thursday evening, I got a text from one of our members, one of our leaders, activists named, she's well known, Esmeralda de la Rosa. She lives in Back of the Yards, now kind of the northern part of Inglewood. And she reached out to me and said, "Hey, Leone, I know this woman who got hurt. She lives in Cicero's, works at a McDonald's out there, got hurt her hand really badly. And, you know, I wanted to turn to you guys. Maybe we can help support her. Maybe she might want to do a workers' comp case and so on." And we talked a little bit. And then Esmeralda got back to this woman. I'll just say her first name is Candida. And then she got back to me and said, well, she wants to think about, you know, signing up with an attorney because she feels like Trump might make the workers' comp attorneys have to turn over the information they have on people to their, you know, to ICE and Homeland Security. And and it's an interesting moment as an organizer, Nick, because there's a part of me that wants to cite the law and say, well, that they can't do that. But there's another part of me that says they might do that. And so what do I, you know, put yourself in my position. I want to support this woman and say, oh, no, that's not going to happen. Should I? Should I say for sure? And it's an interest. So with Esmeralda, who we know each other really well, and she was like, but they wouldn't do that, would they? And I said, you're bringing up a really good point. My advice is to let her know that this is what the law says, and that in Illinois, that's never been done. No one has ever turned over anyone's name in the workers' comp system. And somehow people will have to make their own decision after that, because I don't feel comfortable assuring someone that it won't happen, because I don't know. I mean, to go, you know, due process, I don't want to be alarmist, but I think as an organizer, you have to admit what's happening, or how do you change it? You could make an argument that, do we have due process in the US now? Do we? Kind of, we should, right? But if our president literally says, I don't respect it, and we don't have a Congress, right? The House and the Senate that goes against him, there's a chipping away of due process. So, but back to the question there, Nick. So this woman, she ended up, we connected her with an attorney, and she ended up signing up with this particular attorney. And I think she's decided that, you know, it's worth the fight. But people have that question, Nick, whereas I think a few years ago, yeah, it would be like, yeah, that's right. They can't do that, can they? And let me just add this, for our organization, the work you all are doing, other great organizations and stuff. I think that's the importance of always having a movement. Don't wait till things are bad. Always build organizations that fight for rights, because I believe she might not have gone through it if she weren't part of our organization, because you feel supported, right? And you feel like, I might go down swinging, but I'm not going to go alone. And I'm going to have a lot of people with me, and that maximizes my chance of success.
It's really interesting because we've got obviously an administration that wants to push the limits of the law and will act and then wait for the courts to react and strike things down. So her justification, I mean her hesitancy is completely justified, right? I mean, because you can understand that. But I also appreciate that being part of an organization, you can go in with your eyes wide open. And it's true. I would never have thought of that. But she's right to think about it. I mean, we all, you know, as soon as you said it, I'm sure everyone on this call recognized the wisdom in that reluctance and to raise that question, because we're seeing that across the board with this administration. Let me ask you one last question, and then we can open it up. You know, earlier in the call when we were getting committee reports, there was discussion of Texas, and you know, this makes recall another move by Governor Abbott with the buses and sending buses to Chicago and elsewhere, and we know much of this was a cheap political stunt, a ploy, an effort to drive a wedge between Latino and Black communities. And around that time, in response to this, you and the organization Equity and Transformation, for folks who don't know, organization founded and led by formerly incarcerated Black men and women who work in the informal economy, partnered with Working Family Solidarity for racial unity dialogues. Can you talk about why that was so important, and why and how those dialogues serve to blunt the wedge that Abbott and others cynically were trying to drive?
Yeah, I mean, that's been probably the number one passion in my life. My parents divorced when I was a young guy, and my mom remarried an African American gentleman from Cincinnati who had moved to Galesburg because his mom got a job at the refrigerator factory there, which back in the 50s, well, an African American woman could get a union job there. A lot of racism, but at least it had some stability, right? And so I think a lot of my life has been looking at how our communities are natural allies. And I think that's why this country, the most powerful people, have spent so much time trying to make sure that people of poor people, working people of different backgrounds don't unite, is because we have so much power when we do unite. And so Richard, who was the executive director of when I was at the Chicago Workers Collaborative, I actually hired him, Nick, to his first sort of labor kind of work. He had done HIV and healthcare stuff on the West Side, and we created a program within the organization called Bringing Down Barriers, and it was specifically to support African American people who went to temp labor agencies like Elite Staffing at 55th and Kedzie, where I spent how many dozens of mornings from 4 to 6 in the morning filming who goes in and who comes out and who gets jobs. And it was mainly Latinos getting jobs, even though African Americans had been there since 3:30 in the morning. And when some of the African Americans saw a number of us Latinos on staff, but some of our members, Latinos, were supporting that, hey, you should give first come, first serve. Some of the African American brothers and sisters have been waiting longer. They deserve to go out today. They're on the list first. But going back to the fear and some of the things you talked about earlier, Nick, in your opening remarks, they wanted the undocumented Latinx people who might complain a little bit less. And so the effort, though, at Elite Staffing actually did create change because we were preparing a pretty big civil rights lawsuit that we would have easily won because we just sat there on the public sidewalk filming for like an hour straight. And you would see all the Black people went in and they all got out, and we went down the street and got on the bus and went home. And a chunk of the Latinos got in the vans and went to work. So we were just showing this, and we were like, we're going to turn this over. And we have all these alert lawyers, and they did start hiring more African American people. So one of the things, so Richard and I were working on that, Nick, and this would have been like, 2012 or so. And then at Elite Staffing on Roosevelt Road as well. And so our paths kind of diverged. We kept supporting each other in different organizations. Then he and others founded EAT. And so we came together, Nick, in these racial unity dialogues. Grand Victoria Foundation helped fund them. And both of our organizations sort of do that anyway, but we decided to do it together. And we had 6 of them last year, and we had 30 workers, low income workers at each one, roughly half African American, half Latinx. We weren't always trying to get it half and half. And we would have a different theme like housing, or jobs. And so we kind of started on something, and then we would have a panel of a few people to kind of like I'm doing today or whatever to get people started, and then people talk. And I'll try to truncate it, although obviously that could be a book in itself, but just very rich stuff. Number one, I say this, I'm not sure how to always put this because some people really this inspires them and others think it's not good, but my belief is people have to have a safe space where they can say something that might come out a little bit ignorant. This is just my belief. You don't have to agree with me, but I've been to too many hokey like racial unity dialogues where we all love each other. Oh my gosh, we tried some collard greens, you ate tacos, we're going to hug each other. Out back, when folks go out for a cigarette, because I can speak Spanish and English, you'll get some people still making the same nasty comments about the other group, right? Like, yeah, whatever, it was a cool dialogue, but I ain't worked in construction for 10 years, right? And I used to, right? Until these Latinos came along. And we somehow have to have a space. And for people in our community, I don't know how many Mexicans are on this call, but we say horrible things about Black people. Horrible. I'm a big believer in honesty. Big believer. If we're going to talk, let's talk or go home, right? We don't have time. So we say nasty crap. Black people don't like us in some cases. Let's get it out there, and then let's come back and say, were we born this way? Who told us that this other group was our competitor? We didn't bring that up. And so a lot of our dialogues, Nick, kind of start at a place where we encourage people, if you got something to say, now's the time to say it, right? We hope you'll do it in a respectful fashion. But if you say, I gotta admit, I really feel like these immigrants are taking our jobs. I feel bad saying it, but I want to say it. Say it. And then let's talk. And for some of the Mexican people here, when all them brothers came in and you grabbed your purses and took them off the table and put them down on your lap, I noticed, because I've been doing this stuff a while. I noticed. You didn't even think about it, but all of y'all grabbed your purse, you put it down here. You didn't when the Mexican guys came in. It's okay. It's okay. It's like alcoholics. Let's start there, right? We're all deformed. Racism has deformed every person on this call, all of us, right? From a young age. But through a group therapy of fighting together, we can see that and start to go, whoa, how silly is that? And so that's where we kind of start, Nick, is Rich and I have that same view of let's talk. If we're going to talk, don't bring polite talk, bring real talk, but with some love and spirit. And I'll give you a few snippets. I mean, one gentleman, after one of the ones we did on the West Side, we were just chit-chatting, eating, hanging out. And he came up to me and we were chatting, and he pointed to a Mexican woman who had spoke. She had come into the United States in San Isidro, EWI, Enter Without Inspection, below San Diego, right? And she came in the back of a car in a trunk with several other people squished in and all. And that car wasn't checked, so she came in. But she recounted how many people she knew, and she thought, what if this happens to us? So you go past that, and people in the trunk aren't going, we made it. What they're thinking is, oh my God, we got through. Now is the person driving the car going to drive us out into the desert and do a bunch of horrible things to us, right? Because we have to pay this person to cross us. And where are we going to get let out, right? So just this journey, right, of this young woman who was coming from the state of Puebla, where they just couldn't eat anymore, and her family was sending her north. And so this African-American gentleman goes, man, he goes, I mean, I never really thought about that, man. I've heard about that, but when she said it, I didn't feel like she was trying to put a game or anything. I mean, she was just talking. She wasn't trying to get sympathy. She was just telling her story. And he was like, damn, right? People talking about some of the Central American countries where they're coming from, right? Where their families were killed, where their families were tortured. And one of the things that people always realize, Nick, and sometimes it goes really well and sometimes it doesn't, it's not as amazing, but people always, poor Blacks and Latinos, if you have any shred of honesty, you always realize, if you haven't thought about it before, how much we have in common. We have so much in common. The details are different. We've both been brought in to break strikes, right? Look at the Great Migration. We're not the only migration. The Great Migration of Black people, right? Coming from the South up into Chicago, supposedly getting all these great jobs. And also what we talk to in our organization in these dialogues, but even without the dialogues in our organization, one of the ways we talk to Latinos, because not all, sorry, I'm at home and got a dog who's puny, but very powerful lungs. Hey, dile que se cae poquito. We'll see if we can get him to be quiet. But what people realize is how much we have in common, and how much we're pitted against each other, and how much we're not the ones who created that narrative, right? Like in the Mexican community, it wasn't brought up one day that we think Blacks are enemies. And I think for Black people, that doesn't come out of sort of these age-old myths coming up out of the South. It's that we're now forced to compete for those few jobs. And I think the more people realize how much we have in common, and how much we can change things, and how if no one, if imagine if Black and Latino people didn't go to work tomorrow, right? Um, and I think if people can understand that there's spaces where they can, here's another one that happened, Nick. One young Mexican guy was talking, and he said, it was on kind of hanging out time, and he said, Leone, I'm I'm glad we're doing this because I'm tired of the way the media makes us Mexicans look like robbers and thieves. And I said, okay. And he goes, because everyone knows it's black people who are stealing. And I said, so again, going back a bunch of years, I probably would have been like, get the F out of here, you son of an. But now he's out alone and he's still thinking these ignorant thoughts. I'd rather have him come over here where we can correct him. So I said, now I'm a little older, so I kind of gather myself and said, well, I want to point something out. So why do you think that about black people? And he said, well, you see it on TV. And I said, right. And you just told me that you don't like one thing about TV, that it makes us Latinos look like criminals. But then you turned around and said you believe blacks could be criminals because you saw them on TV. And he kind of just looked at me. It was kind of like, well, yeah, I guess that's true. And I was like, do you have experience like of blacks? All the blacks you ever met are criminals. Well, no. So you can deconstruct it. But I'll go back to this, Nick, to end this part. I think so with the dialogues, Nick, I think one of the things that helped, and I think it doesn't have to necessarily be us or eat, but um, it's within these organizations that people can have the trust, Nick, to say those things. Because they're not going to say them if they don't know a pastor or an organizer and feel comfortable. Like I can tell Leon something that might come out like not so nice, but he'll listen to me. He might not agree with me and he might correct me, but he's not going to like get angry and yell and scream at me. So I think we have to find a place where we really bring in people. I think sometime in the sort of left or whatever, we're like, we're only going to have people that know all the politically correct ways to talk. And if they ever say anything outside, we're expunging you and expelling you from our group. If I did that with our base, we would have very few members. The sexism, right, in our community and other communities is huge, but we can deal with it by keeping them in the organization and then saying, hey man, you really don't want women to participate? Frankly, they're the majority of our activists in our organization are women. Easily 75% of our leaders are women. And what I'll tell them is, are we going to win this struggle with half of our people sitting at home? Even with all of our people, it's a hard struggle. And so we can break through those things, but kind of as we struggle. That's what I would say, Nick.
So Jackie, maybe we can open it up now and see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Nick, for those facts and figures. They're always good. And Leonie, thank you for painting a picture of what's going on out there in the communities. And so for the folks here, if you have questions or follow-up or comments or thoughts, just raise your hand either physically or using the hand emoji here, and we'll get you in the queue. If I see everybody, that is, we'll get you in the queue. All right, Judith.
Hi, thank both of you for your presentation, the numbers and your experience, really important. I was wondering, Nick, I mean, your numbers are incredible. And I guess two things. One, I guess we're among friends, right, Leonie? When is the shit gonna hit the fan? I mean, when is this really gonna have an observable impact to people who don't believe this? And then, what's it going to take for people to start seeing that what Trump is saying is wrong, that they're being impacted negatively? Because, I mean, there's a whole lot of people who have drunk the Kool-Aid. Are you starting to see it crack, and as it gets worse? I mean, every time I go to the grocery store, I'm shocked. I mean, I'm absolutely shocked. But is it hitting in the full force that it sounds like it's hitting, and when do you think it will?
Why don't you go first, Nick?
Okay, well, all I will say is, believe it or not, we're only 6 months into this. you know, and in terms of economic indicators and so on, 6 months is not very long. So I think uh, it's an interesting, the politics swirling around all this is interesting. It's you obviously have an administration that is trying to make us forget various things by hitting us with other things. And then you have the lived experience of folks at the grocery store and elsewhere that are having difficulties. I think the saving grace for the Trump administration is that the economy still is going strong. The impacts, the tariffs are on again, off again, and we haven't seen the impacts of those. The unemployment numbers, well, who knows what they are, um, uh, but they're low, and so I think that has enabled the administration to carry on because it has muted some of the negative impacts that are being felt across this country. So I guess my big worry is that 6 months really is not that long, and we may have a better sense in another 6 months of the toll that some of these policies have taken on the public and on our economy.
Leonie?
Yeah, I'll add a couple of things. So I speak as an organizer, and again, I from the years that I spent working in rural parts of the United States, which were a lot, mainly organizing poor people of color, but some whites at the chicken plants and stuff. But I came into contact with so many frustrated white families. I'm not a political scientist, but the first time Trump ran, I remember I was at a retreat. I won't say exactly what and all that, but of a bunch of labor leaders, and I was invited, and we were just hanging out. And after a long day, we were having a hamburger and a beer or whatever, and just chit chatting. And this was shortly before the first election, 2 weeks out or something, getting close. So someone finally wanted to talk about it and said, "So what do people think? Does this clown have a chance?" And we were at a pretty big table, 20 people or something. Every single person said, "No, no chance. Hillary's got it. It is a scare. He's doing better than we thought. We really better, once Hillary gets in office, we really better, you know, get ready and take this as a lesson." I was the only person who didn't say anything because I thought, well, what do I know? I'm not sure I agree, but I'm not going to say anything because some of these people do more work in that political sphere. I don't do as much. But one guy sitting across from me noticed I hadn't said, so he goes, "Leone, hey, you didn't say anything, man. So what do you think? You agree?" And I said, "No." And they said, "You think Trump can win?" And I said, "Yeah." I don't know he will, not at all. And I trust that you all know way more than I do because you have all these friends out there in these states, get organizing around the election. And I said, "I'm simply speaking from my 10 years in the farm labor movement, where we ran into a fair amount of fairly poor rural whites, and followed by about 5 years in the poultry and meatpacking processing across the plain states and southeast states, where we ran into a lot of poor whites." And uh, it's Trump is not the problem, right? He's the figurehead and an important role, right? But it's a base of people who are frustrated, feel they've been forgotten, and there's been enough organizing by the right wing folks to have these people believing that the problem are are people of color, welfare queens, immigrants, codes, right? Black, Latino, all the different codes, and that it's that wealthy white people are the answer for poor white people, not to be in solidarity as a poor white person with poor people of color, right? Which has been my life's work and many of our life's work to show that we are not exclusive of white workers. We believe they should be part of our work, of our organization, and everything we do in a class consciousness. But it's not easy because they have to get over the conditioning that, hey, at least I'm not black, at least I'm not Latino. We're better. Well, why? You have no Medicaid. Your Social Security might not be there. You have no place to live. How is that better? But you all know the answer, right? The pounding. And so I simply told folks that my concern was that there were enough people that still were living under that myth that I thought he actually had a chance. I hoped I was wrong. Unfortunately, I must have been on to something. So when it'll hit the fan, I don't think I've lived in some other countries. I've lived a number of years outside I lived in Nicaragua. I've been in places where crazy upheavals happen. So I have a little bit of experience with all of this, But I don't know if anyone in the United States has ever done this. I don't know if any of us have ever been in this moment. So I'm not sure anyone can say an answer. One thing that I sensed at some of the big marches that I've gone to in Chicago, I've been across the years. The one I went to two big marches ago, and then I was really sick for the last one. What I heard that I had not heard, just my experience in any other one I've been to over the years, I didn't just see the usual suspects at those marches, and I think that's the hope. I heard people, you're milling around for hours, and so I heard people that were talking about their stock portfolios, right? They usually don't come to marches I go to, right? But they're worried. They're like, I've done all this great stuff and I invested here, and I might not have Social Security, or my mom and dad, right? They might not have Medicare, and I don't know what I'm going to do. So in a weird way, there's two organizing approaches I think that Trump can do if you're evil. One is focus on one group, like immigrants say, and don't really do much else for a bunch of months, and try to crush that group and not mess with other groups, so you don't have other multiple oppositions, right? Trump is not doing that. He's doing, I'm going to throw everything against the wall and try to crush everyone at once. So I'm going to destroy DEI. I'm going to crush universities that are sympathetic to Palestine. I'm going to destroy everything. I'm going to hurt farmers, right? I'm going to crush farmers. Medicaid and social, that's all going to hurt tons of white families. And so I think, sadly, some of the hope is that can start like Vietnam, right? Was the last time we really came together as a country. Why? Why? Because we all had something in common. Our kids were all getting killed in Vietnam. So white parents were going, I don't know about these African Americans, Indians, indigenous, AIM, Chicanos. I'll talk to anyone though, because I don't want my son to die in Vietnam. I don't want him to die. And so we came together and we did a lot. So I think there could be some of that where maybe we realize that the unity that we really all have and the needs we all have is greater than our differences, because he's hurting all of us at once. So that possibly could give us some strength.
Great. Thank you. All right, Deb, go for it.
So hi, well, thank you both. Back to, I guess what I'd like, and speaking of honesty, is can we have an honest discussion about the police? So, of course, Chicago is a sanctuary city, but Chicago also has a long history of problematic relations between police and communities of color. I'm wondering what you're seeing in terms of how the police are behaving, in terms of them not helping ICE and how they're relating to the community when ICE arrives, etc. Can you give us a sense of what you're seeing out there?
Can I jump in there really quick? If you look at
Yeah, please.
we have new statistics now on where by state the deportations are occurring. The largest, Texas, Florida, Arizona. There are some other states in there as well. Illinois not being there. And if you look at where sanctuary state and sanctuary city policies, those areas, the administration has been very slow to do deportations. It's interesting. So the sanctuary state and sanctuary city policies actually have made a meaningful difference in the scale and pace of deportations in these 6 months. And so where you're seeing law enforcement organizations, through 287G agreements, secure communities, and so on, all those agreements is where you're seeing the greatest number of deportations. So the defense, if you're against these deportations, the defense of sanctuary policies is actually a key political strategy to guard against mass deportation.
Yeah, so Deb, I mean, it's a huge issue. I mean, one of the things I want to remind people, I mean, and this was part of our founding at Working Family Solidarity. And when I say that Black folks and Latinx folks and others, but especially Black and Latinx folks, poor ones, we have so much in common. One of those is that repression by police authorities that are called, put the name in, border guard, police, sheriff, right? University of Chicago police, right? Whatever. So if you look at the history of immigration in the United States, immigration, and this is one of the things we do in our organization to remind people from different backgrounds how the oppressor sees us as very similar, and we see ourselves as really different. And maybe we should think about why they lump us together, right? Because we're dangerous when we're together. So immigration used to be where? It used to be under the Department of Justice, right? It's a misdemeanor like jaywalking, right? When I was in the farm worker movement, that we called it INS, Immigration Naturalization Service, which doesn't exist. And what happened when the Twin Towers went down, right? Along with the Patriot Act and all kinds of things that right-wing folks have been trying 70 years to pass and suddenly could pass them overnight. INS was extinguished, right? Immigration Naturalization Service. So no longer is immigration under the Department of Justice. It's moved under in a whole new Homeland Security, right? Hitlerish, right? Kind of the patria, the motherland, the fatherland, homeland. We will protect the homeland. Who? We don't really have any, no one's attacking us, but we're still going to defend. And so when that came together, the immigration and different types of police just melded powers even more, right? So as soon as that happened back in 20,000, what was that, 2001, I guess? Look, that really helped the police and all the different types of police apparatus so there were raids, the Swift plant raids. You probably remember those, Nick. So the Swift plant raids in Colorado, in Iowa, right? They held many of the detainees from Guatemala, Mexico, all kinds of nations, Somalia, white folks, Vietnamese, black folks. They held some of those folks on military bases. And because they were there, they didn't have to tell us whether they were there or not, because they were in military installations and they had been possibly looking into whether they're enemies of the state. So there's a precursor, if you go back, to taking out INS from the Department of Justice. The reason I'm saying that, Deb, is just it moved it more under policing. So it wasn't sort of like a warden in Yellowstone. You go, hey, your visa expired, you naughty boy. And I'm sorry, darn it. I'm going to go to the embassy and okay, bye. Nuh-uh. Now it's the Soviet Union had collapsed, right? So we no longer had a boogeyman to say, all of you should surrender your rights to me, the big, strong guy, so that I can fight this enemy. So that we had to come up with a new national enemy. And with the towers coming down, it became immigrants of color, right? Especially from the Arab world and Muslim. But it's always been somewhat that way, but that moved it from the Soviet Union to these folks, except the right-wing folks kind of come close to you and go, hey, it's worse. The Soviet Union is thousands of miles away. These people are living among us, and we have to separate them. So the policing and immigration it takes a while, right? But it's slowly been getting to the point where now it's being used as an apparatus. And I'm thinking of your question, Deb. I just can't think of policing without that overview, because our personal experience with the majority of times we deal with Chicago, our members, not necessarily just staff, they're unpleasant experiences. Just being straight. We can talk about that all day, I'm sure. We are not finding a lot of cases where the police are violating the sanctuary city laws, kind of some of the stuff Nick was referring to. There was a question. So I'm sitting in my home office across from the Mexican Museum in Pilsen on 19th Street. And if you go to Carpenter, across the park, that's 18th, and then down about 5.5 blocks is Carpenter. At 18th and Carpenter, about 4.5 weeks ago, there was a question about whether police aided ICE a little bit. And a couple people were taken from a restaurant establishment where ICE essentially kicked down the back door, went into the kitchen. The owner said, no, you can't go back there. You can come in the front and talk to me. You can't be going back here. And they're like, oh, we just gonna do it. Then they crossed the street, went into someone's apartment, and they were like, no, that guy's not here. Bam, no warrant. Grab this guy. He spoke some English. So as they're pulling him out, I had a bunch of friends that were over there. He was literally going, they don't have a warrant. They don't have a warrant. They don't have a warrant. And they were like, who cares? Chicago PD was there. I wasn't there. I did hear from some friends that they maybe didn't sort of help ICE, but they kind of maintained order. So, they're saying, well, we're not trying to block these activists from approaching ICE, but maybe they would be violent. So, as police officers, we have to make sure there's no violence. So, I think they did cross the line there, my opinion. And downtown at the at the ICE building down on Congress at Homeland Security there, I heard that they also physically grabbed a number of activists who were trying to deal directly with ICE. And then they said, well, we're doing it because we have to keep the peace, where it's not connected to supporting ICE. So, but I think the response, Deb, was pretty strong. Like we were at some neighborhood actions here, and people were, um, look, I'll use the term. I mean, no one got violent, but people were semi-violent, angry. Like it was just like, and when police showed up, like to kind of walk us along the route, honestly, I mean, a few of us had to be like, hey, guys, we're not here to, we're not here to duke it out with the police. People were not afraid of the police, and they were like, and they were chanting really, really, very strong things about the police with them, like right there. Like really, really, I won't even say the words, right, in English and Spanish, like kind of F the police with like 20 of them right there with us and people looking at them. And so I think that part of the stuff Nick was saying, I think from their superiors, they heard, remember now, we can't be doing that. And then I think they felt like we've seen in some instances in LA. I don't know if some of you have seen some of those videos that don't get out as much. You got to look for them on social media of like some of the, I'll say cholos with love and respect, right? Some of the youngsters that you could look and say maybe they look like a gangbanger, but ICE accosting them, and the young brother saying, why you think I'm not a citizen? Why you think I'm not a citizen? And then the sheriff showing up. I've seen a few of these where, and then just tons of people came out of these housing complexes, surrounded ICE, and ICE left. And they were scared, clearly scared. These guys were not pulling out guns, but they were making reference. They were like, you don't come in here and ask me. I'm a citizen. I don't have to show you, show me. And ICE was first. No, you show me. And after a while, they gathered and talked to each other, and they got in their cars and left. So I do think someone was talking about the shit hitting the fan. I'm not sure. I haven't been in a situation like this, so I don't know if anyone can predict it. But I think it gets. I've been in countries where things happen like that, and it usually happens when people feel like there's nothing left to lose, or little, not as much left to lose. I think probably people feel there's enough less to lose, but let's see how far that goes.
Okay, Jane, you want to ask your question out loud? Or you want me to just read it in the chat? I prefer you do it than me read it. Jane? I guess.
Sorry,
Oh,
sorry, I
okay.
was trying to get there.
Okay.
My question, I had two questions. One was, have there been any legal successes that we can pursue or, build on? And then the second was, I think Leonie is, some of the work you've done in Arkansas and other red states over the years, do you see any levers or potential for getting support in red states for the efforts?
You want to say something about any of the legal stuff first, Nick? And then I can.
I don't know. I mean, it's such a complicated terrain. It seems like, it's like you win some, you lose some. It's because I'm not following the legal stuff too closely. I only know what I've seen on the news. It's complicated to follow. So go, Leonie.
Yeah, I mean, legally, I think one of the things is obviously, the 6-3, whatever you want to call that, conservative majority, whatever, is gonna make things tough, right? Because everything's going to get appealed up to there. I think there've been a few rulings to slow some immigration detentions and so on. But again, Trump has ignored those. So right now I know the ACLU is filing a bunch of stuff regarding the alligator Alcatraz. Um, Lots of attorneys have, said I have not heard from my client for weeks. Like I don't even know if they're there. But again, they're doing what they're doing. So remind me of what was the first question? What Whoever
Jane,
asked that question, sorry, what was
Yeah,
the first one? Or
yeah,
anyone else who remembers it?
yeah. I'm sort of curious with,
Oh,
some
in
of
the
your
red states, the
history.
red states.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
you've worked in Arkansas and other
yeah.
states. Like, is there, like, my daughter lives in Kansas, and I keep saying, like, is there any, and she's in the medical profession. And I was like, what levers do we have for Medicaid there? Or, so what levers do we have in Arkansas and other red states to turn so that they're seeing that this is more harmful than helpful?
Yeah, again, I mean, it's a fascinating question. It would be a huge, you know, 1 week long conference. But uh, over the years, if you look at the support of many efforts, organizing efforts in the South, unions, community, it's I think and the reason I got into organizing long ago is I think it's stuff we have to do every day. There's a saying in Spanish, trabajo de hormiga, the ants work, bringing in that little tiny pebble, right? Because it can't be like suddenly every 4 years. Oh my God, how do we convince people in Arkansas of it? That's too late. You're done. You're cooked, right? It's very difficult. So I think we have to kind of keep doing what we're doing across the country. I think we just have to do it better. And I think one thing we can't be afraid of, we don't need to deal with this as much in Chicago. I've dealt with it a lot before I came to Chicago, or even during my time here where I used to travel for these campaigns. But um, this is a hard one. I mean, we can't see white workers as our enemies, even though they often see us as their enemies. And that's not easy to do because you get tired of it, right? You kind of want to say, hey, man, forget you. But I'm a class struggle person. I believe in that. I'm not a member of any particular, political organization, but I think it's just a common sense approach. You either own something or you get up every morning and sell your physical, mental, intellectual labor to someone else. There's nothing in between. And there's way more of us who work than who own. So it's kind of the way we can do this. And anything that's really worked over history has united people across these boundaries, right? And then we're super powerful and we feel really good. Some of the successes I felt in some of those areas, it was really interesting. So we were reaching out and trying to build relationships between some of the chicken farmers, almost all white, very right wing, and American flags all over their farm and everything, and the chicken catchers, largely black, and the plant workers, largely Latinx. And a lot of the chicken farmers did not want to work with the other groups, but some of them, after a while, saw the wisdom and saw that we could have more power. So I think, you can make those inroads, but it's long-term organizing, because if you do a fast pivot, you're saying, hey, I noticed, Mr. White chicken farmer, that I would stay. At first, they didn't trust me. After a while, they got to like me, some of the chicken farmers, and they would have me stay at their houses, right? Farmhouses with their 300-foot, chicken houses and so on. And so I'd be like, hey man, the company person from Tyson came up, a white guy, manager, had you sign a contract. And when I asked to see it, there's parts of the contract that are blank and you signed it. So how much you getting paid, this and that? Like, and he's like, if I don't sign it, they won't take my chickens. They called them broilers, 7-week grow out broilers. And I'd be like, okay, what about selling them to Purdue or Sanderson Farms? He's like, oh no, these guys are organized. They'll call the other companies and say, no one buys from Farmer Jones, because this guy's a smartass and he thinks and he wants to talk about fair conditions and fair payment. So some of those that felt that oppression after a while felt so disrespected that they would actually kind of cross that racial divide that for us is not a big deal. For them, it's enormous, right? It's enormous. And they would actually work with us. And we were able over time to build some pretty strong committees. The Worker Center of Northwest Arkansas, that's how we formed it, in the Fort Smith area, up in Springdale, Rogers, and all of that, in Western North Carolina, in Morganton, around Case Farms factories and stuff. So you can have those successes. What I've seen is to broaden it to the political specter, you run into abortion, you run into get issues of gay people and guns. So the problem is the labor stuff can work somewhat, and you can build it together. If you're at a meeting where you go, wow, we came together and we won the first contract, and you chicken farmers got a better price, and let's all celebrate. And you're having a beer as you chit chat about things, politics comes in, and guess what? Those same folks that are going to be together on the union floor, abortion, gay rights, and guns is a huge divide, because a lot of those same folks believe that they should have a gun for all these reasons. And so I think some of the challenges, how do you build, how do you work on these labor issues and bring a unity? And then when it's time to vote, that's not the only thing on their mind. And then how do you bridge that gap, right? And I think it can be done. It's a challenge, and it's long term. As some of those poor white folks lose Medicaid, worry more about Social Security, Medicare, food stamps, rental assistance. I think that's where we'll see. But again, I'll close with this. Our organization was founded on trying to deal with that racial divide, because and I don't at all, I'm not trying to make any joke at all. It's a trump card. In any organization I've ever done, the closer we were to victory, the more the owners found a racial or religious or anti-Muslim or some racial or ethnic thing if they couldn't defeat us in any other manner. So we somehow have to kind of figure that piece out so we can win this next fight.
Maureen, did you change your mind?
I just thought maybe we were going to run out of time, but just I wanted to go back to the sanctuary city benefit and wondering if I have been observing this and sense that at my church we support about 10 Venezuelan families, and they're starting to get called to court. And I've been at the first hearing with our family, which they call a calendar hearing, which they're just called in, they show their asylum seeker papers if they have papers, and then they're assigned an actual hearing. And what's been interesting to me is I found the judge to be very, at least even tempered, almost kind in terms of dealing with the family. And their next hearing is not until March of 2026, which surprised us. We thought this was going to move along faster. So I don't know if it's a sign, our other families are gradually starting to get to court. We'll see what their experience is. But, and also in the immigration court, families don't have to show up in person initially. They can go on Zoom. And this was a mechanism to prevent ICE from grabbing them when they came to court. So the fact that Illinois or Chicago County, I don't know how the court system, exactly what level it's on, I think it's county, is set up to provide some protections for the families. And I was encouraged a bit to see that. We'll see how the hearing goes in March. We intend to pack the courtroom with priests, nuns, everybody in our church who can come to stand up for that particular family. But I just wanted to share that because we're at that point of being in court.
Got it. Thank you. Ellen, did you want to ask your question out loud? Ellen Partridge, that is.
Sure. Yeah, I know there are several legal groups that are working with immigrants, but I wondered, what your sense is of whether people are getting the support they need here in Chicago.
Leonie?
So pretty big city, so I certainly can't speak for lots of folks. I mean, from what we've seen, I think people between enough private lawyers who are doing these pro bono or payment plans, or just out of the goodness of their heart, just helping. And, Illinois Coalition for Immigrant Refugee Rights, working with National Immigrant Justice Center and the 800 numbers. A lot of people have used those and have learned a lot, because sometimes you just have to know the next step you need to take. So I would say that people, gosh, who am I to say that, yeah, it's enough? I mean, I would say I'm not, at least I'm not hearing in our organization of people who are who are feeling like, gosh, there's just no one out there. It does feel like, kind of like I was saying earlier on, because of some things that people have experienced in other years, even though this is a tougher moment, it just feels like people are better prepared. That's just my sense. Um, I think that the larger thing for Illinois, because someone was talking about red states, so what you're talking about, Maureen, first of all, that was interesting for me to hear, so I can learn something. But that judge in Illinois doesn't rule like that judge in Louisiana. And so, and you all know that, right? So I'm just reminding us all that the problem is we're becoming, really two countries. We really are. I mean, I think there's reason not to do that, and we should all continue to try to find unity, but we really are devolving, sort of like, immigrants are going to want to come to Illinois. They're not going to want to go to this other state, because some of the judges, I think, just apply the law. I don't think they're really pro-immigrant. I think they just apply due process. But unfortunately, others, and then of course, I think the danger, Maureen, my thing is that's really good to hear. And then I think that the danger is not so much Chicago and Illinois. We got to keep this. First of all, I think we also have to realize that organizing works, and there's tens of thousands of people whose names none of us will ever know, and many organizers whose names we know, but who've really done a good job in Illinois for decades. I mean, we got to give ourselves a hand, right? Long before I got here, I'm not trying to give myself, but like, again, people we don't know, right? But just who really have made that judge feel comfortable that he or she could do that, and they're not going to be like threatened and shot, because you try that in Mississippi. I don't know if you want to go home literally that night, go to a different address. And so I think the danger is, as how that judge acts, Maureen, and how the DOJ now will then sue that judge and say that judge is not, how can you let these people not come to court and be on Zoom? And then we think, well, that's stupid. The problem is that when it goes up to appellate court, they win or lose, then who's it go to? Goes to the Supreme Court. And so I think that's the biggest danger now. We're sort of devolving into these, not fiefdoms, right? But kind of like Illinois, we're kind of packing in together to fight, these other people coming in to try to hurt us. And in Oklahoma, they're doing the same thing in their way, thinking that all of us are rushing over there trying to take their guns away, make their son marry a man, and have lots of abortions. And I say that partly joking, and I've spent time in Oklahoma, and I'm not fully joking. I know people that will agree with with many of the things we've said on this call, and they'll vote Republican their entire life, because in their mind, they read a flyer saying, and I saw this when I was in Milwaukee during the Kerry campaign, and the Bush folks in the Latino area of Milwaukee, where my mom, may she rest in peace, lived for a long time. So I was here, moved back to this area to be able to be near her. But I helped on that campaign for a while. I took kind of a time off my work. We won that area for Kerry. But the Bush people spent almost no resources to gain, 20% of the vote in that area, 25, right? Nothing. They did nothing. They had the most simplest flyers. John Kerry thinks it's okay if men marry men. This was in Spanish in the Latino community. George Bush doesn't, right? John Kerry thinks women should have abortions whenever they want. George Bush doesn't. That's it. That's the flyer. And they want a chunk of votes. So it's interesting, because we're talking about immigrants and labor organizing, and we're going to have to figure out, what is, so at what point do some folks that have that feeling in their heart, like, gosh, what Nick's saying, man, that makes so much sense. Gosh, we should all be working together. Well, but what about those abortions? And so, kind of like, will they get to a desperation point? Because what I tell people, if you want to worry about it, if you don't like abortions, don't have them, right? If you don't want to marry a man, don't marry a man or a woman or whatever. But the fundamental economic issues, right, that make you able to have and raise a family are what we're talking about. And I think somehow, together, you guys, me, so many people, we kind of got to figure out how to bridge that from labor to these other things. And I think that's just the challenge now.
All right, I think we are going to be out of time. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Leonie. This has been educational like I thought it would be. And I just want to know if you want to say anything in saying goodbye to us. And as we said, you'll be able to look at the recording and point it to other folks on YouTube in a few days after Sherry gets the process up there. But if you want to say something, please. We are so pleased that you could come and spend this time with us and give us so much information. So yeah, I'm like the other folks, a very big hand to you. But anything you want to say now before we say goodnight?
No, just on behalf of Leonie and myself, thanks so much for the opportunity to meet with you, and we enjoyed it.
All right, terrific. Leonie, thumbs up. Okay, thank you
Thanks so
very
much. No, I enjoyed it. I mean, I feel like this is what I've done a long time, and we just got to keep doing this, and we can't give up because we all got kids, grandkids, or someone else has kids that we love, and they're looking at a bleak future. So no, we got to rise up big time now.
You got it. Absolutely. So thank you all. Thank you, CWCA, for coming and attending and spread the word. Leonie is right. This is everybody's fight, and we all have to be in it because these are our neighbors, these are our caregivers, these are our food processors.
All hands on deck.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I heard from one of these calls that was on, this woman who was out in California said she had gotten the last avocado that was being picked because there were no more workers to pick the avocados. So avocados are coming in from Mexico, and they're going to have a great big tariff on them, and so that's going to be even more expensive. So this is widespread. So we got to stop it. So thank you all very much. Fight the fight. Okay.
Thank you.